I do the FEI disciplines, jumping, dressage, eventing, vaulting, driving, endurance. Rather busy in all of them. I was the president of the Veterinary Commission for the World Equestrian Games. When you don't look at it from what is normal for that horse, then you cause problems, and nutrition can cause problems.
Welcome everyone to episode 128 of the Send Nutrition Podcast with your host Bryan Peter today. And we have a very, very special guest from all the way over in California joining us on the line, and it is Dr. Mike Tomlinson. And he could be arguably the busiest vet in the world, and we're so lucky to catch up with him. He works up to 30 FEI events a year, and we're so happy to have him on the line. How are you, Mike?
It's a beautiful day here, almost the end of summer.
It's I understand it is in the height of your summer championships right now, and I'm so glad we can get you before you start traveling to the events in USA, Europe, and the Middle East. Is that right?
Yeah, that's coming up in 2 weeks.
Yeah, wow. And for our listeners, the backstory with how we met Mike, and it was actually at Tom Quilty 2023 last year. Peter and I had fascinating conversations all about the horse itself and the physiology and the way to feed and the observations from a high ranking vet like yourself. And we really gelled with our train of thought, and it was a very busy time at that event last year as we were trying to have a chat between your duties.
It was very nice meeting you there because what we discussed is our basic philosophy on how the horse should be fed, not how the horse is being fed. And it was amazing how your thoughts are so very similar to mine. Yeah,
and for our listeners, we might take a step back and profile you, the ones that don't know about you. And you are an FEI vet. And what's the difference between this and, say, a practicing vet? And as I understand, the FEI appoint you to these events and your main role at them.
Well, there isn't really a difference between a practicing vet and this per se. The only reason that I'm not practicing full time is because I'm generally gone. It's very difficult when somebody says, my horse is colicking, please hurry over. And I say, great, I'll be there next Thursday when I get back in the country. So my practice now is referral only. What I focus on in my personal practice is getting them to run faster, jump higher, last longer. And a normal week for me is doing client calls Monday and Tuesday, jumping on a plane Wednesday, being at a competition Thursday through Sunday, Sunday night fly back, rinse, repeat.
And it's not just endurance events that we met you, it's all disciplines?
I do the FEI disciplines, jumping, dressage, eventing, vaulting, driving, endurance, and para. And rather busy in all of them. I was the president of the Veterinary Commission for the World Equestrian Games. I've been doing this since the late 70s. I've done the Quilty as a veterinarian, never as a rider, as a veterinarian for the last 10 years or so. I've been there for there being, say, Melbourne for dressage and jumping with the stars down at Werribee. I've been to SIAC doing the CDIW there. I've been up in Brizzy doing all sorts of endurance events. So, and I am licensed by Queensland, so I'm allowed to actually give advice while I'm there too. So,
can I borrow some of your frequent flyer points as well? If that's...
I'm afraid my kids pretty well have claimed all of those. Yes.
Hey, Mike, it's Peter here. I was just thinking to myself, you've got more credentials and medals than an American general.
I could be a Central American general and just hang them all and kind of be hunched over from the weight of them. But no,
That's awesome. And so when you're at these events, the main role for the vet, I understand, is to see if the horse is at a standard to compete.
My role at most events is to speak on behalf of the horse. I am there for the welfare of the horse. The manifestation that most people see is my saying whether the horse is sound or not at the trot up. But that is really just the tip of the iceberg. It's more so making sure that they have a safe, healthy place to sleep, that they get nutritious food, that they get plenty of water, that they have airflow, that they have all of these things that horses require. If you're familiar with the 5 domains concept, that is what we are looking for to make certain the horses have a good life while they are at these competitions.
Do you see the evolvement of horse welfare becoming, I guess, to obviously the forefront in recent years compared to back in the day for you? Do you see a difference there, or can you comment about, say, the horse rider or their horsemanship as well?
Two very different questions. As far as is horse welfare more important now than it used to be? The answer is, for me, no. But for the public's awareness of it, yes. I have always, for the last 40 years, had the priority be the welfare of the horse. But now, when I say, you can't do that, then I have 5 people behind me saying, yeah, you can't do that. Okay. And so it used to be before, when I said that, they go, oh, but that's classical. You're supposed to be allowed to, things have changed as far as public perception, which to my eye is a good thing. We just have to be sure that we look at things from a sociological, medical, psychological standpoint rather than from an emotional standpoint, which is very different.
And then that leads on to the next question. Do you see the change over your career, say, rider skill and horsemanship?
Yeah. And therein, if we were to cast all athletes with the same brush, which we know is never correct, the average horsemanship of the athletes has decreased dramatically over the last 30 years. The primary reason for that, from what I speak with everybody about it, is that people used to grow up on a farm. They were used to going out and feeding, all day and jump on the horses at night for fun, etc. They lived and breathed horses. You develop a certain understanding of horses when you live and breathe horses. Many of our riders today did not grow up on a farm, probably grew up where their horse was in agistment, and they just don't spend 10 hours a day with their horse. You get a different type of horseman when they haven't spent days and months and years in the presence of a horse.
And Mike, we can see that as well, because Bryan and I do a lot of diet consults for clients in Australia, and especially with the younger ones. It's exactly what you're saying. The horse is on agistment. They might get to see the horse maybe once a day at best, possibly every second or third day. The agistment is feeding that particular feed that the agistment knows or has used to get good results and bad results. My question to you is, nutrition today in 2024, compared to nutrition 20 years ago? Can you elaborate, in your opinion, sort of the pros and the cons of both?
Nutrition in horses, I wish, was science-based, and so I could tell you that it's constantly improving, getting better all the time. The reality is that nutrition in horses is primarily fad-based. In thoroughbred racing, if somebody feeds something and wins, that's what everybody's going to be feeding. To tell you what an anecdote, when I was the team vet for the Barcelona Olympics and for the USA, when our endurance team arrived, endurance was one of the last ones to get there. It was about 4 days after the eventers went. We had the same stalls as the eventers. When we arrived, before we put our horses in, we checked all the stalls and everything. And in each of the stalls was some leftover feed from the eventers 4 days before. It had been hot and humid. You know, in southern Spain, it's hot and humid in August, and all of the feed had fermented. We found people coming through and taking samples from each bucket because they wanted to know what the U.S. team did to win so consistently. And we found people feeding fermented feeds the next year. And it was what was left over from 4 days before. We would never, ever feed our horses that stuff. But that is the science for most people. What are the winners feeding? We want to feed the same thing. What I thought was interesting about our discussion, your and my discussion, was the science behind it, the research behind it, the physiological basis for fiber being the basis, not the fermented grain in the bucket. That is not what makes somebody win.
Yeah, we were 100% aligned with that you have to have a reason why you're feeding, not have a fad or copy someone else's way, because every horse has different abilities, and to have them happy and healthy on the inside is to do with physiology, not the color of the bag.
And how glossy it is. That's the most important thing. If it's shiny, we'll see it first. So.
Mike, I think the conversation you and I had, I'm not sure whether you remember that. I think we spoke about, like, obviously roughage being a foundation, unlimited roughage. Obviously, you know, you've got to correct that roughage with vitamins and minerals, which we had in our grain-free product, and then obviously feeding an oil separately. And your words were, you may or may not remember, you said, well, this is what we were doing 20 years ago. We were feeding all these elements separately, and we had a healthier horse, we had a better horse, but it was just more work, where I think everything's gone for convenience these days. Everything's in one bag. Feed 4 or 5 kilograms out of one bag. It's quick and easy. It's balanced, and, you know, your job's done. Do you remember that conversation we had?
Oh, yeah. And that's just, yeah, I remember making up entire kits for people with this much salt, this much sodium chloride, this much potassium chloride, this much calcium, this much. And that is the way we did it, probably not 20 years, probably more like 30 years ago, but quite a while ago. And the thing is that we were feeding the roughage and then balancing the roughage, and that was it. They didn't get 12 different things, but we had really healthy horses then, and the people really understood what they were feeding their horses. These are the highest level competition horses. They knew what they were doing. These days, nobody has time to measure out how much potassium chloride goes in their horses' feed.
So what's gone wrong, do you think? You think it's been a lack of education? Do you think like something's must have gone wrong along the way from sort of 30 years ago. Like, in your opinion, what do you think it has happened?
Well, I'd love to say it's because the people who are guiding them haven't kept up with it, but realistically, this world is so much busier than it ever was, and nobody, with the advent of cell phones and Dick Tracy watches and everything else, people don't have time to focus on their horse the way they used to and arguably should. So now if they can get everything in one bag and it's just as good, they should do it. The problem is knowing which one is just as good.
And what we do see is a lot do lean on their vet for the nutrition advice. And I think we've touched on before the amount that you have to keep up with nutrition for horses. Is it satisfactory in the vet course?
Well, there are two parts to that. One, what do you learn when you're in school? And two, what do you learn when you get out? So when you're in vet school, the nutrition is very rarely a large component of any veterinary education. I know in mine, and hopefully things have changed dramatically, we had one semester of nutrition for animals, and that included everything from frogs to eagles to horses to cows to sheep to everything. And if you think you can learn about digestion, nutrition in one semester, then you're crazy. But so when you get out of vet school, some people know a whole lot because they've really enjoyed it and studied it, but the average veterinarian has no clue what they're talking about. So what do the nutrition companies do? They do the same thing that the pharmaceutical companies. They invite you to a dinner as a veterinarian, and they teach you about their product. And the problem is that just like the pharmaceutical companies, they have a very specific interest in getting you to recommend their product. So amazingly enough, all the studies they present that evening at the dinner, which has wonderful wine and everything else, all the studies recommend their product. What needs to happen, and what has happened for me, is that I have a personal interest in nutrition and like to read about it and have my own horses at home. So I get to say, well, what if we change the hay like this? What effects do we have? And there are really two ways of determining whether your feed is doing well or not. One is to do all the calculations and get out your NRC book, get out everything else, make sure everything's in the green, make sure everything's just perfect according to the paper. And the other way is to look at your horse, ride your horse, really ask them to do what they're intended to do. And if they do it well, if they do it to your satisfaction, and it's working, you don't have to always look at the books. It's a great place to start, but sometimes the books say it's perfect, and then you get on your horse and your horse isn't perfect. So listen to your horse, not the books.
And we couldn't agree more enough with that train of thought, because in our over 100 episodes in this podcast, I think you can hear it a few times that we say, be the scientist of your horse, treat them as the individual. Don't look at your friend's horse and think you should mirror that diet or nutrition, because you should be assessing your horse's response to a particular nutrient profile. And we get it time and time again. We do over 100 diet consults a month for the various owners in Australia that they follow the NRC. They've all got the green bars and they call us and say, we are not getting the result. So we pull it back down to the foundations of fiber first to help the hindgut normalize, which is basically that engine room and what a horse naturally thrives on if you nourish this first. And the research, and I think you may give more insight, probably the latest 5 to 10 years has been a lot of focus around this area of the horse, the hindgut.
There is so much. The hind gut was the black hole. We could only scope towards to the stomach and maybe a few inches farther, and so anything past that was the black holes of Calcutta. We had no idea what it was, and if it went in the front end and came out the back end, it went through there. We knew it was good. We have learned so much since then. We know how important it is. And what most people don't understand, sometimes when I go out to look at a lameness or something else, and I start asking about the feed and the feeding management, which is the management is just as important as what you put in, but how you put it in. But I end up doing very little for the lameness and find out that it's their management and their feeds that are causing the problem. If the horse's hindgut is not healthy, you do not have a healthy horse. A horse cannot jump their best. A horse cannot run 160K if their hindgut isn't doing well.
No, thanks for that, Mike. I've actually, I'm going to copy your saying that you've coined because I really like it. If you can't understand it, your horse won't understand it. I just think that's the best thing since sliced bread. We get a lot of these diets with some people feeding 10, 15, even 20 different products and supplements. I think Colonel Sanders in America would have been happier with that secret recipe because that's how complicated it is. But can you please explain what you mean?
Well, what I mean is their intestinal tract, their gastrointestinal tract will not be able to understand it. And what I mean by that is we have a rule of thumb in medicine. If you are prescribing more than 3 or 4 drugs, then they are going to interact and you are not going to get the response you expect. And what I see when I go out somewhere and ask them what they're feeding, and they go, oh, well, I'm feeding hay. Well, no, what else are you feeding? Oh, well, I'm feeding this and this and this and this and this and this and this. And what I find is they're all from different manufacturers, and one of them is way too high in this, but so are 2 of the other ones. If you're feeding more than 3 supplements, then you probably are having interactions that you do not know about and are not helping your horse. Keep it simple, and the horse's gut will be so much happier. They are better off with a deficit for some things than to have too much of it. And you gotta, you really have to be careful that you're not over supplementing your horse. Do it with 1, 2, or 3 simple ones, not 15 little ones.
And we can echo again that simple mantra of feeding to the foundations of roughage. And at Sen, we have that Sen feed pyramid, which has one bag, either a concentrated vitamin mineral supplement or a slightly less concentrated one with calories, plus the plant-based omega-3 and the salt. And it is that simple to help balance the shortfalls in the roughage foundation to get their body systems and nourish them in that high performance. And our success in the high performance industry has to be highlighted.
Well, I think your simplistic way of going about it is the most intelligent way anybody ever could. Often when I go out to a high performance horse's home and I see that they are on 15 different supplements, the first thing I tell them is take them off every single supplement, and the person turns ghost white. How are they going to survive? And the answer is they ferment hay. They make most of their nutrients from the hay. If you have good bacteria in the GI tract, you will have good nutrition for your horse. So often I go all the way back to just hay. Then we start adding in 1, 2, 3 supplements at the most. And those supplements are for specific things. There is a reason for each one. It's not because, well, it has a really shiny bag.
I've got a really big pet hate that I'd like you to elaborate on, because I'm sure you've seen it with a lot of performance stables, even individual clients of yours, where let's just say using an endurance event, it might be a 160 kilometer event. The horse has been trained on on whatever diet, hasn't had much grain. Let's just say it's been on a high fat, sort of high fiber diet. And then that owner has a light bulb moment saying that, well, I'm going to give it a kilogram of oats at each hold just to replenish the glycogen stores. Can you elaborate why that's a really bad idea with the gut microbes, obviously, that aren't used to that particular grain or starch?
Well, the number one mantra when going to a major event is, if you haven't done it for at least 2 weeks before, don't do it today. Do not change it. Do not try a new saddle. Do not try new running shoes. Do not try new boots. Don't try anything new, and especially don't try a new feed. Now, why is the feed so important? The horse is a fermenter. Their cecum is about a huge trash bag size, and in that are the bacteria that break down and ferment the fiber which you are putting in there. If you and I just ate fiber, we would die. We digest by acid. They digest by fermentation. The big vat which is fermenting is the cecum. If you always feed the same thing to the horse, the bacteria become very happy. The bacteria learn how to do what they need to do and get the right vitamins, the right calories, everything to the horse. If you change it takes up to 2 weeks for the bacteria to adjust. So let's just say you're on race day and you decide to change something at the first vet check. It's going to take 2 weeks for that GI tract to restore to normal from that one insult. So do not do it. You need to be consistent. Never change the feed quickly. Always change it slowly. You can withdraw quickly, but don't add quickly. Adding slowly over a week to 2 weeks is what you want to do. Whether it's your roughage, whether it's your concentrates, whether it's any of the additives, do it slowly for the horse.
We are so aligned, Dr. Mike, because our previous podcast was about that transition of hay types or hay batches and the dangers you can run into if you don't transition that over 2 to 3 weeks to help those gut microbes assimilate to a slightly different nutrient profile, even if it's the same batch of hay. So I echo your thoughts. Keep it consistent into the competition and your horse will be happier and healthier because 70% of the immune system is there. You've got the gut-brain connection. So if you want that behavior or that effort given by your horse, keep it consistent. And it's music to our ears.
Well, you mentioned the gut-brain connection. The impact of having a sour stomach is immense. Can you imagine going around feeling sick all day, every day, and people say, I need you to jump higher, run faster. You're going to, tell them some choice words where they can do that. If your horse feels good and wakes up in the morning going, I feel great, and you say, let's jump higher, they go, I'd love to. I want to. That's exciting. So nutrition affects their performance directly.
And would we be right in saying that a fiber fermenter obviously, is supposed to have a diet high in fiber, high in fat? With endurance, I find it a lot of, even the top end, even probably some of the Olympics team, they're still very grain heavy or very, grain byproduct heavy. What's the advantage, if any, for those teams feeding a high grain or grain byproduct compared to a diet on the contrary, which would be a high fat, high fiber diet to those endurance horses as an example?
Well, for the answer to that, you need to go back to their original physiology. And that is, horses are designed to have their head down, walking forward, eating for about 20 hours a day. And that was their entire nutrition, and it worked out fabulously for them. What has changed? Several things. One is we don't ask them just to walk anymore. If they're going to do 160 kilometers, they're going to be trotting or cantering much of the way. So we're asking a lot more out of them. They need more calories. They also need more salt. They need a bunch of other things, but they need more. And that is more than they can get from just eating a fiber diet. So if your horse does not do a lot and maintains weight and, in your estimation, is healthy on simply a fiber with a few vitamins and salt and everything to balance it out, then that is all the farther you need to go. Do not feed them concentrates. They don't need it. If your horse is competing or training and cannot maintain their weight, then you need to go to the next step. And that's where you need to add sugars or fats. And it could be in the form of grains. There are all sorts of different things it could be. But keep in mind, you are adding nitroglycerin to your feed now. And it will make the horse put on weight. It will help them as long as you feed within limits. But as soon as you go just a hair over, it's going to blow up in your face. So you need to be very careful to balance it with the needs of the horse and what the horse can do. I've seen too many horses blown out by too much grain. It used to be 20 years ago when you were on an endurance ride and you saw a horse that tied up, the vet's first question to the person is, how much corn is this horse on? And they'd always look at you quizzically like, how do you know? It just was very simple. You do this, you get this problem. There are so many things about feeding. When you don't look at it from what is normal for that horse, then you cause problems, and nutrition can cause problems very easily by well-intending people.
And it goes right back to that mantra, as we said before, knowing your horse, knowing its metabolism and the way it processes certain energy or calorie sources. But that probably leads us into a cooler calorie source, as an example, as fat over grain in the form of oil. And Dr. Mike, would you recommend an oil type, or what do you see widely used in the industry that could be improved?
Well, there are many oils that are vegetable-derived oils that are totally normal for the horse and are easily digestible for the horse and are very safe as long as they have been properly processed and stored. The worst thing in the world is feeding your horse some rancid oil, and you're going to have a sick one very quickly. But if it's processed properly, stored properly, this is very normal for your horse, and that is what the hind gut wants.
And with the animal-based ones, like the fish oils?
I know it's very simplistic, but I'm not used to horses doing much fishing. And so there weren't a whole lot of fish in their diet when they were out on pasture. So I'm not a big proponent of doing a lot of fish oil. It isn't going to hurt them, but it certainly isn't natural.
Is that similar with horses jumping up on trees and trying to get coconuts and breaking the shell and eating the pulp inside, which is copromeal?
There are quite a few things that we feed to a horse that are totally unnatural. And in general, in small amounts, it's fine because who knows, maybe some of those coconuts fell off and they ate a little bit, but they did not live on them. This is not normal for a horse.
And touching back on rancid oils and oxidation, what we have in Australia is the leading oil type and the most popular oil in our Sen oil, which is a first cold pressed flaxseed oil. So a food grade one that has the lowest acidity value or acid value, lowest peroxide value on the market, where we stabilize it in long-term storage with the nitrogen. We are aware of the oxidation, and the benefit of our oil is providing that high plant-based omega-3, which is over 57%. It has to be known that you can state an omega-3 level, but is the rest of the oil rancid inside as well, which could be doing more harm than good with free radical production, ingestion, and then that antioxidant load, where the horse should be using the antioxidants to repair and recover from their performance, not mop up the deficiencies in the oil that they've ingested. So oil quality is a must, and you should be sourcing one from a trusted supplier. And as Dr. Mike said, the lowest oxidation and less rancidity, the better.
Oh, so much so. And where you store it, how you store it, even if you get it from a fabulous manufacturer, if you don't store it correctly, then you're not going to be feeding the good stuff. And so know that it takes both parts, a fabulous manufacturer and proper storage. One example that I quite often give people is I see somebody spending $120 on a thing of vitamin E oil, and they open it up and they pour a little in, and they do that every day for a month. And I say, you realize the first day they got a full dose. By the end of the month, that thing has been oxidized, open to the air so many times, just opening it up and pouring in, that you're probably just as well off to feed them, oil off your table. It has just as much vitamin E as that has been opened every day. So really think about how you are handling your feeds when you are storing them and feeding them at home, because you might be the reason why they're not doing any good.
I've got a question, Mike. In America, say compared to Australia, because you've been here a couple of times and you've been overseas in Europe, in the Middle East, is there any one thing or sort of nutrition related, is there any one thing or one object that you see that are doing incorrectly worldwide that you'd like to sort of maybe give a tip of why they're doing it sort of incorrectly and maybe what they should be doing, and whether that's roughage, whether that's too many concentrates, whatever you've come across in your last sort of 30 years of traveling around the world?
Oh, what I can tell you is that every country is different, and I've gone to some very poor countries who practically live with their horse because it's their means of livelihood, and with no money, they know more about their horse and do better to feed that horse than people who spend $100 a day on their horse. I think the biggest thing in the first world countries that I see is over supplementation with indiscriminate products, meaning too many things that they heard somebody tell them, oh, add this, it'll do great. And they have no idea why they're doing it. And I can tell you those horses have the most expensive urine in the world.
As we said before, it's all about balance and knowing your horse. And I think we can't echo that enough because we see that day in, day out in Australia as well.
It's worldwide. The decreasing horsemanship, the lack of education, the lack of knowledge about their horse is worldwide. It is not just Australia at all. Australia actually is probably a little better than most places, but unfortunately it's declining at the same rate.
I've got a personal experience that I've just come back from Europe, and I'm working with a couple of endurance riders that are going into next month's FEI World Championships, and I looked at the feed that they were using, and I'm not going to name any sort of names, and I swear it had like 35 individual raw ingredients, from your corns to your soya hull, soya beans, to your kernel, wheat, bran, you name it, it was there. And I'm even thinking to myself, it would be almost impossible to balance 20, 25, let alone 30, but 35 different raw ingredients. And then you've got to try to get the vitamin mineral profile right on that. So I looked at it and I literally got a headache. And then when people ask us, well, what's in your hard feed? Well, we use hulls and kernels. We've got 2 ingredients, and they look at us like we've just like flown in from Mars and so on. Oh, but my horse will die. It's not enough. Do you know what I'm saying? It's almost like we feel like that we're from outer space.
Yes, they want to know how their horse could survive. What I can tell you is that horses are just as prone to allergies as humans. And there are so many horses that have an allergy to one of those 25 things. And the horse can't tell you, but they just don't feel right when they eat it. But it's all they eat every day, so they don't know any better. They don't have a choice. Often when you take them off one of these things that has 25 things in it, and you back them back down to just a simple 1, 2, 3, 4 ingredient product, they get so much better so quickly. And it is strictly because one of those things upset their gut.
It's very true, because when I talk to, especially, more the performance sort of, trainers or whether it's sort of customers, when I see, everything but the kitchen sink on the diet sheet, I literally said, look, I'm not going to make your horse go any faster or anything like that. All I'm going to do is I'm going to take the handbrakes or the shackles that you've put on that horse, which is actually hindering its performance. So we're not giving it any more to make it go quicker. We're removing those things that are actually slowing them down.
Yeah. And just to throw a little anecdote in there, horses' conformation, I can tell you 30 years ago, people would have me come out and tell them about the conformation of their horse, whether I thought this was going to grow up to be a fabulous endurance horse. And you know what? After a decade of doing that, what I've learned is it's not the legs, it's not the girth, it's not the heart score, it's what's between the ears. If they want to win, if they want to go faster than all the other horses, if they're excited about doing that, they will outperform a horse who is 10 times better conformation. And so the corollary from that to nutrition is if their gastrointestinal tract is happy, if there's nothing they're allergic to, if it's digested but not too easily, if their bacteria are happy and consistent, they will go faster, farther than any other horse.
It's almost like what Bryan and I preach sort of here at Send on a daily basis. The more things you give, the more chance you have of something going wrong. That's pretty much what you're saying, yeah?
Oh, absolutely. And that is just medicine. That is science. We know we now have 30 drugs for anything you can think of. And if you go to the doctor, sometimes they'll give you 1 or 2 things for it, but that's it. They aren't going to give you all 7 the first time, because they know if they give you 7, you're going to have a reaction to one of them. And it's the same thing with feeds. When a horse isn't optimal, you back it back down to just the basics, and you rebuild from there.
And I think from Peter and myself, who we started Sen, we're both co-founders, and it is basically our 10th birthday this year, and this week actually, in fact. And we are considered a more pure or raw way of feeding with no unnecessary ingredients and fillers, and we have a reason behind each part that we include in a diet, and we always refer back to the physiology and the science around the horse and how their physical response is. And I think this conversation today, Dr. Mike, has been a very nice parallel to someone very well credentialed in yourself, and we can't thank you enough for your time for today and elaborating on your experiences.
Oh, it's my pleasure, because if I can make one horse feel better, it is so worth it.
Mike, is there any sort of parting words or any sort of message that you'd like to leave our listeners on? And look, and it might even be for some of the vets in Australia here or overseas that might be listening to this podcast. Is there any sort of message that you want to echo out sort of around the world?
It may be very trite of me even to say, but the important thing to look at is the horse, not how much commission you're making off of the supplement.
And would you say, in terms of, say, medication and omeprazole use and that type of example, do you have views on this as well?
Oh, if you want to get into that entire end of it, that's a whole different thing. But the bottom line is, if you feed correctly, if your management and your feed are appropriate for that horse, you do not need omeprazole.
We obviously working with vets here, and if readers read the fine print inside the packaging, it actually states don't keep them any longer than 2 weeks, and especially if it's grade 3 or 4 ulcers. Me and Bryan always preach roughage is your natural anti-ulcer. If you get enough roughage into them, keep it high fiber, keep it high fat if you need the extra calories. As you just mentioned, you will not need to reach out for that medication.
Correct. The medication is used for people who do not feed proper feed with proper management.
And they're taking shortcuts to the health of their horse. And if this is your first time listening to the Sen podcast, and Peter did say the roughage, and Dr. Mike said the roughage is that anti-ulcer. Why is it? Because the saliva produced helps that gastric environment become less acidic, and that's what the omeprazole is doing as well. So you've got the nature or natural way, and then you've got the medicated way, which has the side effects, as we know.
Yeah. Nobody today would ever try and do a pharmaceutical instead of actual hard work, would they?
That's society at the moment, I think, Mike, around the world, 2024.
So, yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me on. I think that you are leading people in the correct direction, and look forward to listening to you and watching you grow and help horses everywhere you go.
And we're absolutely blessed to have you. I was a little bit sort of deer in the headlights, when Bryan said that, that you were coming on. I was a little bit sort of starstruck. So I thank you for coming on and being honest as well. Obviously, from a veterinary background, your nutrition isn't at the forefront, but you've actually taken time over the years to research yourself, to put it into practice, to see what some of your customers and even the elite performance guys are doing right, but also what they're doing wrong, and spreading that with our audience and your audience around the world.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
No worries. And I think we both have that mantra where putting the horse first before us humans. And if you did enjoy this podcast, please get us into that hundreds of 5-star reviews on our Spotify or Apple. But thank you once again, Dr. Mike. We respect you. We respect all your views, and thank you for your time this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you.